So we're going to present today, we're calling it Lean and Mean, how to make the most out of your accounting, compliance, and HR, and how to really turn those departments into things that help drive your bottom line, build your revenue, and make you successful. So my name is Ali Piscatelli. I'm the founder and owner of Budding Operations Compliance. We're out of Denver. I started this business 5 years ago after working in dispensaries and production labs and cultivations for almost 6 years under Colorado's regulated market. This gave me a really good amount of time to start understanding compliance and how that works into your workflow. You're not really going to get away from the compliance requirements, so it's best just to embrace them and figure out how to make them work for you. So happy to be here today, and I'll let Alexandra introduce herself.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Alexandra Ruby, and I'm the CEO and founder of Happy Gnome HR. We are just about a year and a half old at this time, but I did get my start in Denver as well, almost 11 years ago now, in various roles, operational roles, business development roles, really learning the ins and outs of all different types of operations in order to eventually start my own business, which just happened to be HR. So business development into operations and then into internal HR for a few different organizations, which is where I discovered the massive need and void that was HR in many organizations. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but super happy to be here and to help you guys navigate the waters.
Hi everybody, my name is Mark Waller. I am co-founder and managing partner of Morum & Waller CPAs. We are a full-service CPA firm based in Minnesota, but we work in all 50 states. And good thing about CPAs is you have a uniform license, so you can practice in all 50 states, so that's always a good thing. I have been a CPA now for over a decade and started my career in public accounting, worked as a controller in the nonprofit sector for 10 plus years. So really cut my teeth on that overall accounting finance role, and really overseeing a successful accounting department and what are the things that you need to have, not just as a bookkeeper, but overall, what are the steps that any successful business needs to have a successful accounting department that really integrates with all of the other departments in the organization. And then our firm specializes in the cannabis niche, and we've been doing that now for a few years, and that's been really rewarding. And as I'm sure you all know, cannabis years are 1 year in cannabis is like 10 years in real life. So, so definitely found that to be true. So nice to meet you. Thank you for having us.
Yep, and Ali, I'll just say a couple more things because I didn't really tell you what Happy Gnome does. So we're a fully outsourced HR company. So we become your HR department. We build out the HR department, and then eventually, plan to hire your internal team once you're up and ready, once you've scaled to that point. And we also work in all 50 states that are anywhere that's legal. So.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. So, why does this all matter, and how can we help, or how can you help yourselves in these situations, right? So out of curiosity, how many people in this room currently have a cannabis license? Quite a bit. Okay, how many of you are actually open? Yeah, so lots of people still in the preparation stages, right? And I think you're probably learning very quickly, but there's no easy way to start a cannabis business. The checklist of things that need to be done and to be thought about is extremely long, and you're answering to many government bodies, not just the CCD, but the Department of Agriculture, Food and Safety is going to come in. The fire department cares what you're doing. So, you think that compliance is just about the cannabis regulations, but it really goes a lot farther than that. We have a lot to live up to here in the cannabis world. And then I guess raise your hand if you're looking to get a license and sort of on the fence about that, maybe. Yeah, it's quite a process. So, and in here it's a little bit easier than other states. I don't know how many of you have operated or tried to operate in other states, but the application process here is not as stringent as it can be, but that doesn't mean that your operational requirements are not still very important. So a few questions to ask yourself when you're starting a cannabis business. Do you take compliance seriously? Is that, the backbone of most of your conversations, even when it comes to marketing and labeling and designing your marketing strategies. Are that within regulations? You don't want to spend a ton of money on packaging and labeling that you can't use, and I see that happen quite a bit, right? Get wrapped up in the glitter side of it and not the things that need to be included. Do you consider the people on your team a valuable asset, right? Are you investing your time in your employees to get the most back from them, right? Do you have processes in place for record keeping, accounting, scaling, getting investors in the future? People who invest in businesses want to see your books, right? Your projections, and how are you able to put together budgets if you're not keeping your accounting in order? And what really happens if you don't invest in human resources, compliance, or accounting? We're subject to external audits by a lot of the departments that I mentioned earlier. But those audits can happen at any time and can become very costly, not only in your time, being brought away from your daily job to answer questions, supply information, but really working backwards, right? You want to be keeping up on all of your requirements, all of your record keeping on a daily basis so that you're not scrambling to provide the documents that could be requested in any audit. There's also fines associated with a lot of compliance infractions, whether that's through the IRS or through the CCD or even the fire department, right? You have to pay for making these mistakes. So it's great to be prepared to not make those mistakes. Costs are not only financial, they could be mental, it takes your time, it could be emotional. You're starting this business to hopefully make money and be part of this new industry. You don't want to be bogged down with the stresses that come along with not being prepared. So just sort of quickly, how can we help? Right now, when you're a startup and maybe you only have one license and you've not scaled yet, outsourcing is a great way to minimize the cost of these things. You have one dispensary, you don't need a full-time accounting firm on site, you don't need more employees to manage as far as compliance goes or process development goes. So outsourcing is a great way to minimize those costs until you've really scaled into vertical integration or multiple locations. And also really thinking about, as a business owner, what is the best use of your time, right? What is your skill set? Where are you best used in your business operations? And what things do you need to give to other people, because it's not necessarily your strong suit, right? We can't be good at everything, even though we might want to. So I always say to try to stay in your lane as well. And also, accounting, HR, and compliance are hard to navigate. I can't just become an accountant tomorrow. That is a skill that takes time and education, and you want to be able to use your resources the best you can there. So I just wanted to run through a few things that sort of connect all of us together, and then I'll let the other panelists give you some of their information. To all of us, data is so important, right? You're relying on different departments, different employees to keep proper and accurate data. And if we're not keeping accurate data, you're making decisions off of inaccurate information, right? So you're only really as good as your record keeping, your data tracking. And data goes from everything from your cost of goods to how much you sell product for, to how much loss you have, to how much you're spending on payroll versus marketing plans and things like that. So you're really relying on all departments to help inform you. You also want to make sure that you're doing things that are measurable, that you're able to measure your success, right? And that can come in forms of feedback from employees or customers or other vendors or supply chain partners that you work with. But that also really comes from internally setting goals and making sure that you can measure if you achieve those goals or not. A simple example in cultivation would be yields, right? You're trying to achieve a certain amount of yield per light, per room, per square footage. If you're not tracking your wet weight versus your dry weight versus how much goes into extraction versus how much goes to the store, you don't really know what that yield was and what strains are producing for you versus not, right? In a store, obviously the sales to the customer, but how much did that inventory cost you versus how much you're selling it for? And are you even making a margin on your prices, right? Are you looking what other people are pricing the same product at down the street, across the state, nationally? So it takes a lot of research and preparation to set yourself up for these successes. And finally, how do we all work together? And I wanted to give some New Mexico specific explanations of why you really need to think about these departments and think about these jobs when it comes to opening any of these businesses. Here on the retail locations, you're required to have a monthly inventory reconciliation. It only says that under the retailers. Every license should be counting their inventory on a monthly basis. If you think you have 1,000 plants and you only have 800, that could make a big difference when it comes to your supply that your sales team thinks that they have to sell, right? And those monthly inventory numbers go directly to accounting. So they use that information and they only believe you that it's accurate. So they're relying on you to make it accurate. You're required to report any theft or security breaches here within 24 hours. And you're also required to tell them what somebody took. So the only way you're going to know how much somebody took is if you already knew how much you had in your point of sale or in your seed to sale tracking, and then you count it to discover the difference. But if you don't know what you started with, or that isn't accurate, it's going to be harder to figure out that information. And also typically, if there was a break-in, you would speak to your staff about that. There would be some sort of support that you would give them if they were traumatized or hurt in a situation like that. So directly ties back to HR as well. There are general training requirements here and license-specific and job-specific training requirements. So everybody has to be trained on emergency protocols, for example. And then if you're handling edibles, you also need a food and safety certificate, right? So that takes a lot of planning, a lot of tracking, and typically an HR department would help you keep track of personnel files and things of that nature. But they also require you to track the date, time, the topics you were trained, have signatures from the employees, and to do that annually. So you need to know how often you're doing that. You're hiring new employees. They need to be trained and caught up. So that is a requirement that also requires you to work with HR. And finally, right now, we've heard through speaking to some other professionals that this one might get changed a little bit, but they're requiring that you, number one, of course, keep accurate financial records, but that you engage in a third-party financial record audit with a CPA every 2 years. Now, that in itself is very expensive. Now, if you're not prepared for that, it's even more expensive. They said they might put a limit on that. If you're only making X amount a year in sales, it might not affect everybody, but it is showing you that the regulators are thinking about all of these things when they're putting the regulations together, and it's our job to make sure we're thinking about them when we're building our businesses, right? And that they're part of these pre-operational plans, that this isn't something you're just going to figure out how to do once the doors are open. It's much harder to work backwards. I do a lot of inventory auditing. Please just audit it frequently. It takes hours to work backwards, and any of us would spend a lot of time working backwards. So enough about that. I'll let Mark talk a little bit about accounting and how that can help you with your business.
Yeah, thank you. And to build off that, at that point, Allie, I think just yesterday you texted me with a client, and you were like, "Thank you for getting me started on a client at the very beginning instead of one of the other clients where we did have to work backwards." So it's true. It's like it definitely happens where it's so much easier to start from scratch rather than have to go backwards. So I wanted, before we get into lean and mean accounting practices, I want to kind of set the basis for what kind of a healthy accounting department should look like. And when I talk to clients a lot of the time, or new businesses, and they say, I have an accountant, it's my mom, or it's my brother, or it's somebody I've worked with for 30 years who knows accounting. I'm sure they all do a fine job of that, but there is something specific about cannabis accounting that's really important, that really needs to be handled in a particular way for cannabis. I also want to kind of go through that you shouldn't just have one accountant handling everything, but you really need to have several roles filled. So first to kind of walk through what those roles are, I think the first one is, you think about day-to-day bookkeeping. Typically, people think about QuickBooks. If you have a QuickBooks file, that's kind of what most people associate with day-to-day bookkeeping. When you think about the actual roles that go into everything that you have to do to keep accounting records, it gets to be very complicated very quickly. So what we think about when we think about a strong accounting department, you have the day-to-day bookkeeping role filled. And what I like to think about is accounting software these days typically have bank feeds. So every day, your bank will, if you have a bank account, and obviously with cannabis it can be difficult to get a bank account, but for the most part, banks that have online systems will connect with your accounting software. That piece can be automated, so you can see your cash transactions on a daily basis. And what we recommend is that you have a bookkeeper actually checking that on a daily basis, because it can get very difficult to catch up on things, especially if it's over a month old. As accountants, we always see, if we see like a list of several months worth of cash account transactions that need to be updated, can be very painful and very difficult for a business. So we recommend that there's somebody checking that on a daily basis. And then businesses pay invoices, they receive invoices. You want to be able to match those items so that if there's cash activity that has documentation, online systems allow you to match those and keep a good digital record of your books, because as we talked about with audits, auditors, whether it's a third-party CPA audit, it's an IRS audit, they want to see the receipts. We've heard numerous IRS agents say, "Show me the receipts," when we've worked with and talked to other CPAs. So that's really important. And then with cannabis, because there's so much cash that's being handled, we really strongly recommend that there's a strong cash reconciliation process, and that means you should have somebody, if you're a dispensary, you should have somebody at the store counting your cash every day, and it should be somebody separate from the person who's handling the cash, so that you have a separation of duties, and you have a physical sign-off every day, because again, that's a very important piece of audit trail that you'll want to hang on to. Then when we talk about the controller role, there really should be kind of somebody overseeing the bookkeeping, because you don't want to put your bookkeeper on an island. That can be very dangerous for the bookkeeper, especially when it comes to safeguarding assets. You never want to put one person in charge of signing all the checks, distributing all the checks. The risk of fraud is just way too high to do that. So you want to have a controller who's overseeing the bookkeeping, who kind of makes sure that all of your accounting is done in a proper way, and then can help consolidate all of that data into a monthly financial statement, which is important also for cannabis, not just for knowing what's happening in your business, but to be able to take as many tax deductions as you can, you need to have that monthly financial reporting. The IRS actually says that. And then internal control, I mentioned earlier, you want to be able to have more than one set of eyes looking at everything that's happening. So that's an overall position that needs to be filled. And then we kind of think about CFO and tax compliance, somebody who's looking at maybe a 10,000 foot level, but being able to look at what's happening and say, look at our budgets, look at how are we doing according to our budget, maybe do a quarterly forecast that readjusts based on what happens in your business. Obviously, tax filings are extremely important. We could talk about tax filings for a long time. And then bank and investor relations, I think that's an underrated part of having a strong accounting function, is that you need to have somebody who can be a point person, who talks to the banker. The banker will be asking these types of questions about financial statements, and so you need to have somebody who can confidently fill that role. And then same for investors. If you have investors, typically they want to see financial statements too, so you want to be able to answer their questions appropriately.
I forgot I have to move the thing.
Yeah.
And that reminded me from the bank situation though, that quite often you pay a big fee to have a bank account, and they expect monthly reports, and I send Mark a lot of monthly reports that go straight to a bank. So you're going to have somebody on your team that's responsible for those things.
Yep, for sure. So kind of big picture, thinking about when we see a healthy accounting department and an unhealthy accounting department, I start with unhealthy. It's very easy. 280E obviously is a huge thing in cannabis, but I also think the things before 280E, just the monthly filings that you have to do, payroll, state sales tax, if you're not on top of those, that can get very painful very quickly. So, when we see clients who haven't filed a 941 or have a few months delinquent on sales tax, those are not necessarily grand scheme of things, big picture, but they can take away your attention from running the business. Not having a bank account it's very difficult, and obviously in cannabis it's a huge issue. We want to have banking available, but unfortunately we don't have that. There are banks that will work with you. They can be costly, but I think it's worth the investment. But so when we see a business that doesn't have a bank account, that can be a red flag for consultants, but for anybody. So you want to at least try to get a bank account. And then, not having any bookkeeping done for several months, even if you're in the pre-operational stage, when you're still paying, you're still a business as soon as you file your articles of incorporation, you're a business, and so you should be doing some kind of bookkeeping. So we want to make sure that you're doing that. Whereas, a healthy business, somebody that comes to us when we do our onboarding process, who has their Secretary of State's filings, their articles, their payroll set up, those are all really good things. It makes us really happy when we see that. And then having, obviously you want to make sure that your accounting department that you're working with is familiar with cannabis and understands the difficulties that they're working with.
Sorry, were you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then just briefly on 280E, when people come to us and say, help save me money, and by the way, I want you to take all of these deductions. As a CPA, we're gonna put the brakes on that a little bit, because it's our liability on the line as well when we sign returns. Typically, we want to make sure that things are done correctly. So please don't come to us and say, I want to deduct my everything under the sun, because we won't do that. But also just not taking receipts, not keeping receipts, especially for big dollar amounts, that can be very dangerous for you for 280E, because think about it from the perspective of if an IRS agent is coming to do your audit and you have, say, a $50,000 transfer to somebody and you don't have any documentation for that, that's immediately going to be a huge red flag for them. And then the other thing is just, I call it the shell game, where oftentimes we hear people come to us and say, I want to save money on 280E, so I set up 5 different LLCs, and they're going to pay this one, and they're going to pay, that they're going to transfer to this, and how does that work? Unfortunately, the IRS looks at your business as a trader business, so they're going to see through all the LLCs, and they're going to look at it from that perspective. There's obviously tax strategies that you can follow, but typically you want to think about what would kind of pass the muster of the IRS. And we're not against, being aggressive, but certainly don't try to outsmart the IRS, because it won't work. But then a healthy environment is one that's really thinking about the true cost of goods sold, has done some time studies to allocate expenses, and then keep it simple, so that, again, if you're thinking about it from the perspective of an IRS agent who's never seen your records, make it easy for them to understand and make it well documented. So, if you have documents that you can walk through yourself and say, anybody can walk through this and understand what it is, that saves you a ton of time.
Are you good? Oh, you want me to go back?
Oh, no, we're good.
Okay.
We're good. And then, as far as kind of being lean and mean, per the title of our panel, we like to use things like HubDoc to attach documents to your record keeping, so you don't have to keep a huge box of receipts. You don't have to, spend a whole lot of time with that. There's a lot of online systems that can help automate some of those processes, so we like those. Using systems that are proactively cannabis friendly can also save you some time, because unfortunately there are some third-party systems out there that might shut you down, knowing that you're cannabis. But there are, when you're doing the due diligence to pick software, ask them, do you work with cannabis businesses? Because that can save you a lot of headache. And then, cloud-based accounting, cloud-based record keeping. There's, Google Drive, Dropbox, all of those systems that work really well, and you can keep all your documents in one spot, and that can save you a lot of time as well. And then, this is just general business practice, but I think when we talk about accounting, HR, compliance, all of those positions are kind of leadership team positions. So as owners, you should be talking to them a lot. You should be talking to your staff. You should have a pulse on how your business is doing to make sure you're setting up all these systems. Are you actually following through on them? Because it's one thing to set it up, but it's another thing to see, is it actually going well? And then I think I covered that. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
Sure. Okay, so we'll get into, really, why do you need HR at your organization and when? I'll begin with just a few of the main points, and it unfortunately comes back to compliance as well. Just state and federal law, and that these are requirements. And so we like to get that out of the way. We call this technical and tactical HR. It's really what's required through that department. If all else was to be, we're not focusing on culture and employee experience and things like that. Let's just make sure that you have all of the policies that are required. You have employee handbooks. You're doing the proper audits. And really this should be left to somebody who is credentialed, who has been certified and has a background in HR. It can be done at times by administration up until a certain point, and what we see in cannabis oftentimes is that business owners are simply trying to keep their head above water. They're sinking at times, and they've got they're spread so thin. They have all these things to be thinking about. So they hand it off to an administrator or an executive assistant or a store manager or somebody that is just at the business that they can just hand these things off to. That only lasts for can only last for a certain amount of time, and then you really need to have somebody in there that understands the process and how to create those things. Another reason to have certified HR or somebody in that dedicated role is to mediate things, to advise and to keep a very fine line between ownership and upper management and the rest of the employees. And this comes down to confidentiality, safety, and security. If things happen within your organization, which is very common in cannabis from what I've seen over the last decade, things like sexual harassment, discrimination, employee relations issues, it's very common. So to have a dedicated person to handle these issues, to remove the ownership from that liability and involvement is a really strong thing, I think, for new business owners to consider. So let me just do it on my computer too. So we'll begin with what does an unhealthy HR department really look like? This is, and if you have a background dealing with HR, it's commonly seen as the principal's office. You don't want to go talk to HR. None of us, we don't. If you're getting called down there, it's probably because somebody tattled on you or something of that sort. We really want to get away from thinking in that way, and as business owners, really creating a positive interaction, a healthy relationship with the HR department so that you can encourage those employees to reach out if they need anything, as opposed to coming to you. And then a lack of processes and policies. So not having things like HR handbooks, employee handbooks, and not having PTO or sick or social media policies of how to handle, when the bud tenders had a bad day, or you didn't, something happened with an interaction with one of your staff and they go and, blast it all over social media. Having systems in place that would, create consequences for such behavior. That's a piece of HR. A poor understanding of the role and responsibilities. This is a really, really big one that I've seen over the last 10 years. People simply don't understand all that HR does entail. And it's often seen as staffing and recruiting. So you just do all of our hiring, you find all of our staff, what else goes into HR? What does the day-to-day operations of HR look like? A lot of it is the creation of policies, the maintaining of policies, staff communications, all employee relations issues. And oftentimes what we see, I see it every day, is it creates mistrust and a lack of transparency in the organization if you don't have an HR department. If you don't have somebody like HR that helps guide along management, and once again creates that nice line between ownership and the rest of the staff. Mistrust and lack of transparency are very common and unfortunate because it kind of just dismantles the excitement, the passion, the loyalty, that makes up a quality culture. So let's see here. Well, just one more moment. So then a lot of that mistrust and lack of transparency will really evolve into high turnover rates, which is also very common, as we all know. So, if you don't have this nurturing, loving, passionate, safe place that you provided to your employees, you're most likely going to see a lot of turnover. And in New Mexico, while people are very excited, lots of people are entering into the space, there's only such a large labor pool, especially if you're in rural areas. It's something to strongly consider, is that, you have to retrain these people. You have to keep them and retain them. And so that you don't have to go searching and hiring constantly. And I always say that hiring itself in cannabis is a full-time job, beyond all of the other things that HR should be focusing on. And we see that, a company will think that they're ready to, bring on HR, and then they only want to bring them on to do all of the hiring because turnover is so high. So they don't actually get to focus on things like employee engagement and experience. And then just lastly on this slide, or two last things. We don't want to avoid HR. We want to have the tough conversations. We want to begin having HR conversations as soon as you really are designing your business plan. And I always say, unhappy people plus poor performance is only going to, contribute to lowered productivity and profits. They are directly related. And while HR is not traditionally seen as a revenue-generating department, it really isn't. It is a money-saving department. So go ahead, Allie.
It's out of order if you want to do that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, the healthy one.
I gotta go back. There. It's a little slightly out of order.
Okay.
We fixed it.
Okay. So what makes a good and healthy HR department? Having that dedicated HR professional is very important, even if it's not a full-time, person. Somebody that staff can go to when they need to. Being compliant with all the state and federal laws and doing routine updates. Just like all the other two departments, we go through audits, we go through constant regulation updates, and this is nationwide. Things with OSHA and how to handle policies, where to report things. There's so much that goes into keeping things compliant within the HR department. I already mentioned the clear lines of separation. One thing that's really important to remember is it always starts with ownership. It always starts with the people at the top. In creating that healthy environment for employees. If your employees don't feel that you respect HR and that you hold their responsibilities and that office in high regard, they're most likely not going to respect you or the rest of the company, and that's super common. So let's see here. Yeah, so Mark mentioned this earlier, just having HR having an equal seat at the table. So when you're creating your business plan, when you're thinking about your workforce management strategy, who are you going to be hiring over the next few years? It might not feel like it, but HR is just important as sales and finance and all of the rest. So that's something to keep in mind. And then we discuss strong systems, processes, and policies. That's really what allows the HR department to run efficiently. And then, of course, the fun stuff is having HR around to help increase and make employees happy, having a fun culture, creating a place where people want to come to every day and they wake up excited to go to work. It's massively important, and your customers are the ones that will experience the benefits of that. Okay, lastly, retention. So these are just ways to reduce turnover and increase your bottom line. It kind of comes back to that, how does HR contribute to the bottom line? What is the ROI of the HR department? Seeing HR as the pulse of your organization, it's really showing you how healthy you are. How happy are those people? What kind of, conflicts are they experiencing on a daily basis? Do they know how to handle those things between themselves? Do they respect your management? In what ways can you increase the positive relationships that you have in the workplace? Do you send out employee newsletters? Do you update people on birthdays and who's having kids and things like that? Let's see. Yeah, and so just making this an ongoing investment is really important as part of your overall strategy of running your business. And one thing that a lot of people are not quite aware of is remuneration strategy. It's a little bit of a foreign term, but a very important one. And really what remuneration means is alternative ways of compensating your employees that are non-monetary. So, performance management. Employees are going to always be asking you when they get their next raise, even if it's 25 cents. That's a very common thing in this industry. And so letting them know when they're going to get their performance reviews is really important. And not having to compensate them through monetary ways. So, training, investing, giving them access to training platforms and modules that the company pays for. Things like that. That's what remuneration strategy is, and I strongly encourage you to do a little more research. I got to wrap up a couple things here, but okay. Just that the expense is worth making. I promise you all. Happy people equal happy profits, and that's really the motto that we like to live by. So I think I'll hand it back to you, Allie.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to make sure we left time for questions here, and I can kind of just graze over some of the things, right? So there's so much requirement in every department, right? And how, they spoke about ways that you can see your return, you invest in your employees and you have low employee turnover and you're not wasting money every year replacing them. You've kept your correct bookkeeping records, you're paying someone on a monthly basis to do that. You'll pass your audit and not have to pay somebody to work backwards. And really when it comes to compliance, there's so many things, right? You have facility compliance that includes signage, passing inspections by the state. You have record keeping, required waste logs, required pesticide logs. You have inventory is the biggest one, right? And what programs you choose in order to track this inventory, right? You want to make sure that you're choosing programs that work together. Duplicate entry takes time. Now you're paying your employees more money to do things that could be done quicker if you put thought into all the systems, actual systems and programs you're going to be using, especially on the storefront, you have to use a point of sale. You're going to have to pick one on top of BioTrack, right? And BioTrack you have to use because the state required it. Neither of those have communication tools to customers, so you're going to need a texting program or an emailing program. And some of those connect to certain accounting programs, but some of them don't. So the most you can do to cut down on duplicate entry, the more time you will save, really. And I also wanted to mention, you're spending all this time counting inventory, tracking inventory. Well, what do you get out of that? Well, you can determine your shrinkage or loss. And, that's really big when it comes to regulated industry where you're not supposed to lose even 1 gram or 1 unit of something. But also any business, right? You're putting in time, money, labor, products, you bought raw material, you bought flour, you want to know how much you're getting your return on your concentrate. And if you're losing a lot, can you find out where in the supply chain you're losing it and go back to HR and retrain and tighten stuff up? Waste is considered inefficiency, right? We're going to create waste, but you want to create the minimal amount that you possibly can. And some other classic mistakes that I've really seen is in labeling and packaging. Do not order 10,000 units of anything because they're going to change the law and you're going to have to change it. Don't buy 10 years worth of vape carts or 10 years worth of eighth jars or any of your branded labels, really think about how much you're going to use in a 6-month period, I would say. I saw in Colorado probably about 5 years ago, they gave you 6 months to sell out of your inventory that wasn't labeled properly, and then you could either relabel it all, which is time consuming, so you need to figure out the value of what you have left and if it's worth it. Also, if you're a dispensary, get all your vendors to send you new labels, or destroy it. And we destroyed a lot of product, and that's all stuff that you already bought, right? So definitely don't over order those things. Don't go for the mass deals to save a few cents. You'll have to throw them out in the end. Another one I see, so if you're following regulations about testing, you have to test every batch, every harvest batch, every production batch. Make sure when you're propagating plants or you're deciding to do strain-specific concentrates that you're going to get enough units out of that batch to even cover your testing costs, right? You have to think your cost of goods include testing costs, packaging, labeling, labor. If it costs you $10 to make a cartridge, you need to sell it for more than that, and then the consumer needs to buy it for more than that. So keeping all of your costs down while making compliant decisions, that's why you need to have somebody who knows the laws so that all of your great ideas can be executed within the requirements. So I want to make sure we had time for questions. I'll open that up in a second, but we also made a little checklist, operational checklist for you guys. We're going to put that in the back. We'll be here the rest of the day. If you guys want to talk, if you want to go through that list or just chat with us, we'd be happy to. You can just grab us or anything. That's sort of a free take home, just to sort of keep all of the ducks in a row. So with that, does anybody have any questions for any of us? Yes?
You mentioned remuneration, compensating employees with things that aren't money. It seems like you had more to add to that.
I did, yeah. That's a fun one, I guess, for me. So there's, in cannabis, depending on the state that you're in, you're only allowed to compensate employees through payroll sometimes, or they'll tax anything you give them, like gift cards at 50%. We see things like, we see that in Colorado. So you have to really get creative. Maybe that's, planning parties for the staff, or, giving them a day off to go do a volunteer type thing. I have a very long list of ways that employers can compensate employees. It's important to think about what does that individual find motivating or incentivizing. What one person might want a day off or a half day, or another person might want an Amazon gift card. There's things like that, but there's a lot of creative things that you can do.
Alex, what do you think about incentive programs? So sales incentive programs,
Sure.
Efficiency programs, things like that, in order to give back to your employees.
Sure. I think with remuneration, I like to keep it in the lens of, as an employer, not what's going to make you more money, but what's just going to satisfy that employee. So there are a lot of great incentive programs and things that you can do that will increase your bottom line and your sales. But I think the point is to replace what you would replace a pay increase with something that is a 1 or 2 or recurring type thing, but maybe is less than if you were to give them $1 raise, something like that. Yeah.
I would add too that this is an area of payroll and pay for employees where there's overlap right away, because on the accounting side, we may be running payroll, so just the basis of do employees get paid on time can be a huge issue. That if they're not paid on time, that can become an HR issue. So there's always that overlap in areas like payroll, that it's just so important to be able to cover all those bases.
So, Mark, as far as payroll goes, while you're on that topic, having hourly payrolls and then converting them to salary, and then those salary employees then are probably going to endure more hours through the general 80-hour payroll week. So what is in the lens of legal, as employers, what can we do to not get in trouble by mandating an employee work over 40, but as a salary employee they have to?
Yeah, that's another area. Going from non-exempt to exempt, I think it hits your financials obviously, but I think it's also a huge HR issue, because I think Alex, you could probably speak to that.
I would say it's probably more in the vein of an HR issue. just because of classification. So even looking at YouTube videos or giving us a call, we can walk you through really how to classify employees and when you should make that transition and what it's going to cost you to do so. As a business owner myself, I would say hold off as long as you can before converting people to W-2. You're required to manage so much more, delegate so much more. You're with independent contractors, ideally they understand their role and they come with the skill set to just handle that on their own without you needing to hold their hand or constantly manage them. I think the management is a really big piece of that. But and then you have to, of course, get unemployment insurance, workers' comp, and things like that, which is a whole other level of just added responsibility and reporting, monthly reporting. So as soon as you really start hiring and bringing people on W-2, you need to do monthly reporting to the state, and it's just an added kind of stressor, I suppose. So, yeah.
I was just going to add to that too. I think not everybody's cut out for a salary, right? You really have to be somewhat of a self-motivator. You're going to accomplish your job, just not when the clock is up. But what I also see happen a lot in cannabis is, they tack these jobs onto existing roles, right? She had mentioned earlier the store manager. Okay, now they're also going to do HR and they're going to run the store. Some of these things are just bigger jobs than that. So I would be cognizant of when you're putting together job descriptions for people that you're not giving them way more than they can handle, right? Setting that expectation too high for anybody to reach, right? We have to learn how long tasks take and who can execute what better and who's set for what task, right? It doesn't have to be specific HR role, compliance role, accounting role, but making sure that you're getting through all of the required tasks and not overloading them on just one person, right? That's how you burn people out, right? I'm sure we've all experienced weeks where we work over 40, but that should be the exception, not the rule, right? You'll get burnt out in this industry either way. So being cognizant of your expectations for people, and if they can actually meet them, or if you're really just setting the bar too high, the list too long, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Mark.
Okay.
It has to do with this biannual audit.
Yeah.
It seems kind of odd to me because it's an annual audit.
Right.
What challenges would an operator and the auditor have with a 2-year audit? Are you auditing 2 years, or are you just auditing the previous year?
Good question.
That's a really good question. Yeah. So the question is, would a biannual audit be covering 2 years? I don't know that New Mexico has clarified that piece yet. But the way I would handle it as an operator is the same way you would if you're getting a regular audit, annual audit at any given time, because it's the same principles are going to apply no matter what type of audit you have. As if your record keeping is good, your audit's probably going to go well versus the alternative, obviously. So I would just say, I see that happening in more states. I think it hasn't quite happened yet, but I also see the IRS, obviously we know they're hiring more agents. 280E is a huge audit. It's a huge revenue generator, to be honest, for the IRS. So there's going to be audits, especially as more and more businesses become legal. So I would just, as an operator, I would just focus on compliance and do your best there. If you do that, then things typically take care of themselves.
Okay, of course I want to add something, but well, and I've experienced with regulator inspections, right? And whether it's the CCD or the IRS or anybody else, the more organized you looked, and you have a binder ready with all of your required logs and things, the less they have time to look around for something else, right? So even though they might only be auditing the previous year, if they find a lot of mistakes, they're going to go back farther. The officer might be coming in to only audit that you have all of your signage up, but then he notices that the vault door is open. Now he's like, well, what's going on in here, right? So if you're prepared, there's less ways for their eyes to wander and find something else. But every person who audits you is different too. I've had inspectors with different ideas of what the law meant, and so really, being organized is the best way to get through something like that,
Yep.
I think.
For sure.
Any other questions?
I would just add one more piece to that, that we three, our departments, operate as a system of checks and balances, really. So even if you don't need, full-time at, whatever, part of the life cycle of your business you're at, outsourcing or having somebody that you can bring in routinely to just do checks and balances, I would say at the very least is a good practice. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mark was able to identify a threshold timing on when you get accounting involved, and he said that's when your articles of incorporation are put into the state. In compliance and HR, can you identify threshold timings in the development of a business when it is important to get a third-party compliance individual involved, or say a third-party HR company?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, the application here was not that difficult. You signed a lot of attestations that said you would do what the law requires you to do. In a state like New Mexico, I wouldn't say you need a compliance rule to apply for the license. But once you get that license, thinking about compliance-related things should be the first thing you're thinking about, right? It goes through everything from how your building is going to be designed to what sort of, maybe you're making edibles, you need to order food-safe containers, right? There's a lot to think about, so I wouldn't even start putting a shovel in the ground until you had somebody on your team that was familiar with not only cannabis regulations, local building codes, fire department, food and safety, someone who can really bring all of that into your workflow. So pretty early on.
So I would say for a full-time HR person to come on would be closer to 25 employees, something like that, where it's really kind of out of your hands at that point. You need to be focusing on revenue. But at the same time, that's why outsourcing, especially in this remote age that we're in and with all of these businesses opening up, you can accomplish a lot from an outsourced perspective, and it'll save you a lot of money. So I would say, I know it's kind of a joke, but if there's more than 2 people in a room, you need HR. But I would say that you could get away with maybe 5 employees. But employees deserve that representation. That's what you owe them as an employer. So having that employee handbook, knowing where they stand, knowing what to do when this happens, just having those processes in place needs to happen really on day one. But, you can get away. I shouldn't say get away, but you can manage without HR for a little while with employee relations issues, especially if you have a group of people that just get along very well, that you manage themselves.
Yeah, and I think that all goes back to, you could really get away without all of this, but it's going to come back to bite you. So either you do it up front or you're going to have to do it later, right? So getting ahead of it, being proactive, it's really the most efficient way to make sure that you're not working backwards when you are open. I don't want to cut into the next person's time. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We do have a handout, so you can meet us in the back. Contact information, stuff like that if you have any additional questions, and have a good rest of your conference.